Well, good afternoon. Welcome to A Reason for Hope. My name is Adrian Ben Vactor, and I'm happy to be in studio with one of our pastors here at Calvary Christian Fellowship of Tucson, Arizona, Sean Richards.
And Rafi.
Our walking Bible encyclopedia. Very great guy. Hey, so how is, I'm sure you've talked about this already, but how's newlywed life going and happening for you?
Yeah, going into 9 days now, and very thankful for the very difficult lessons that it's teaching me already. Obviously, the kind of things that you observe in single life are just kind of taken for granted, and then God just brings all these things out into the open, and suddenly, oh, I'm selfish. So yeah. I'm glad to be growing up in better directions than I would otherwise.
And since Allie and I celebrated our 9th anniversary 2 days prior to your wonderful, it was awesome. It was such a great day, great group. It was just beautiful time, and I don't know how the elder, your dad, kept a dry eye. I mean, I know that he was doing everything. I mean, the way he explained it, it was just great when he talked about it at church on Sunday. But anyhow, it was just a beautiful time. And 9 years in, those lessons will be learned daily, still, continuously.
And for those listening in our audience, make sure that her identity is kept private because of the nature of the conversations we have on the program. She has already become a target of lots of threats. And following tomorrow, we'll have some responses to those things. So stay tuned.
Yeah, by the way, today on A Reason for Hope is Apologetics Monday. One of the reasons why people tend to target Christians is because they tend to do content that exposes or, in their view, knocks down their worldview. And we hear this all the time when it comes to Christianity. On a daily basis, throughout the centuries, Christianity has always been a huge target for when it comes to either the Enlightenment or higher criticism, the higher German biblical criticism, the Jesus Seminar, you name it. Christianity has always been a target, and Christians have always accepted that target with what it means to be a Christian. Jesus said, "You will be persecuted for my name's sake." So we sort of expect it, and the Bible teaches us as believers that we are to love our enemies, pray for those who persecute you. So we just smile and go, hey, this just confirms that what the Lord told us 2,000 years ago would happen, and it's still happening. And so we don't have a problem with that. I have no problem standing on a college campus and say, I believe in Christianity because it's true, not because it makes me feel good, not because I was raised in a Christian home. I wasn't. Not because I get any kind of benefit from being a Christian. In fact, I have remained a Christian at great cost. Professionally, you name it. The ostracization that I experienced when I first became a believer in my home was pretty decent. And, the things that I encounter when I go overseas as an entertainer and share my faith, just say, hey, here's my show. Here's, I hope you had a good time. And by the way, here's what is very meaningful to me in my life. And I share for like 10 minutes in my show about what the Christian faith, what the Bible, who Jesus is and what he has meant to me personally. And sometimes people accept it very gratefully. Some people get upset and throw things or threaten me, but hey, that comes with it. However, that's not how all people react when their most sacredly held beliefs, whether it be political or religious, are challenged. And so unfortunately, we do live in a world where people want to hurt, defame, or silence those who would oppose their views simply by articulating an attempt anyhow, not always perfectly because we're all flawed human beings, an attempt to articulate a counter to these beliefs. Every worldview has recalcitrant facts, and we try to point those out. And so that's all we're doing here, and especially on Apologetics Mondays, rather than taking questions about what does the Bible say? How do you respond to this? How do you respond to that? On Apologetics Mondays, we not only laser focus on a particular topic, but oftentimes this topic would be polemical in nature. And what I mean by that, Sean, you are as well as anyone knows how important polemics can be when it comes to evangelism, discipleship, the Christian faith, the battling of ideas. Christians in the West tend to be a little too politically correct. We've been sort of brainwashed by this idea that Christians are to just smile and love, and maybe we should offer a defense, but we should never go on the offense. And so apologetics is the offer of a defense of the Christian faith. It comes from the word apologia, 1 Peter 3:15. Be ready to give an answer. Be ready to give a ready defense for anyone who asks you to give an answer for the hope that you have in you with gentleness and respect and so on. But polemics is saying, no, I'm going to actually dismantle what your worldview is. And so what happens is that people seem to think that it's unloving or unchristlike to do that, if I might just go on a little tangent. And a lot of times, and this is funny, Sean, because I remember I touched down in India, and it was like, I don't know, maybe my third or fourth tour out of 12 in South Asia, or specifically India. And my host was just decided to lecture this, Westerner about how to do ministry in India. And he says, just focus on the love of Jesus. Don't talk about Hinduism. Don't talk about various beliefs. Just focus on the love of Jesus. Because that's what Paul did. And he goes to Acts 17, surprisingly, as his example. You see, Paul, he just talks about the Lord. And I'm sitting there thinking in the backseat of this car, in the most crazy traffic on earth. I had just landed. It was like 1 a.m. And I'm just smiling. I didn't say a word, but I'm thinking to myself, well, he's correct in the sense that our predominant attitude should be focusing on Christ and his love. However, the goal of every communicator, especially when you're doing evangelism and apologetics, whenever you're trying to reach someone, it's very important that you remove every stumbling block except that of Christ. Paul himself said in 2 Corinthians 10, we have weapons, not the kind the world has, but they have power to demolish strongholds or fortresses, home bases.
And how does he describe them? Arguments.
Yes, and he says, we demolish. What are the weapons? Not the way the world is. What do? They destroy home bases. They destroy fortresses and strongholds, the house of the enemy. How? He says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of Jesus Christ. And we take those thoughts, those ideas, not our own Christian thoughts, but the thought of the person whom we're dialoguing with, the world's thoughts, their ideas, the battle of the minds, and we take them captive and we make them obedient to Christ through argumentation, through reason, through the application and provision and communication of evidence. So that's what we do here on Apologetics Monday. And polemics is simply me taking the stumbling blocks out of the way. So if I'm talking to a Muslim and he's going to sit there and think, yeah, but the Quran says, or because this or because of that, I'm wasting my time talking about the love of Jesus. I have to go over to his camp and go, you know what, this little stone right here that you keep tripping on, I'm going to move it out of the way. I'm going to be polemical for a moment with gentleness and respect, and I'm going to remove those stumbling blocks so that you can have a clear, in other words, as I was taught when I was at the Communication Center with Campus Crusade for public speaking and evangelistic speaking training, they said your goal as a communicator is to clear the bushes so the person can have an unobstructed view of Jesus. And that's all we're doing here on Apologetics Monday. So if it seems like we're being a little combative, understand that our motivation, our heart is to clear the bushes, to make sure that everyone who listens, whether they are of a different faith completely, or maybe they're of one of these what we would call anti-Christian, but sub-Christian views, like Mormonism or Jehovah's Witness or Christian Science or whatever it may be, that seems to believe in Jesus but has what we would consider an obscured and false view of who Jesus is. Same with Islam, the monotheistic religions of the world. If it seems that we're a bit abrasive or unkind, it's really because you cannot play defense without a little bit of offense. Mm-hmm. So with that said, just real quick, if you want to engage with us, you can join us on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is A Reason for Hope. You can go to youtube.com/@ A Reason, the number 4 Hope. You can also catch us on Facebook. Our church's Facebook page is Calvary Christian Fellowship of Tucson, Arizona. So if you go to facebook.com/CCF Tucson, you can get us that way. Please encourage you to like and subscribe. And of course, if you like our content, please share it. Comment, that'd be great. You can also catch the live stream on the X platform by following our senior pastor, Scott Richards. His handle is ScottR4H. That's Scott with a double T. the letter R, the number 4, the letter H. And whenever we're live, you'll see a little notification on the X platform. You can also catch us on our website, calvarychristianfellowship.com. You hit the Watch Live tab. You don't have to have a social media account. You don't have to have a user. You can just create a username temporarily, and you can comment and ask questions that way. You can also email us your questions, questions at areasonforhope.org. That's questions at areason4hope.org. That said, we'll take a moment to pray, ask the Lord to be with us, and then we'll tackle today's polemic.
Indeed. And thank you for the honor you've given us to represent your word and to combat those that claim that this would by any means bear your name. And as those who are listening will both be engaging with Muslims or maybe Muslims themselves, we pray that they would hear your voice and recognize the authority of a true prophet, a true revelation of who you are, and that ultimately his name would be honored so that your word can stand on its own authority. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks, by the way, for launching the X one. I missed it today.
No worries.
Appreciate it.
We all got our jobs to do. So
today's topic, break it down for us real quick, and then I will do the best I can to, I don't know, maybe be a little devil's advocate, but we'll see.
Yes, and to the point. So when we're talking about any arguments you're going to have with Muslims, obviously the main source or authority that they're going to be defending, if it ever comes up, is going to be what they call the Quran, which is a Syriac word that means recitation. Now, where we would go to our Bibles and use it as a source of truth, that we would consider it a connection with God insofar as it is revealing the nature of who God is, the Quran is seen at another level entirely in the lives of Muslims, where if a Bible was burned, we should probably be heartbroken, for lack of a better term, when we see the waste of such valuable information, but we could always just print another Bible. When it comes to the nature of the Quran for a Muslim, it's another level entirely. A Muslim would see the Quran, the physical book itself, the same way that a Christian would view the literal body of Jesus. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the Quran is the literal, eternal speech of Allah, that only people who have a quote-unquote relationship with Allah, only a true faithful Muslim, should even be holding the text itself, that they have special holders to make sure that it's not ever defiled in some way, that the defiling of the Quranic pages is seen as a direct attack and insult on the nature of their God, and of course this definitely not example of idolatry is ultimately centered around the closest thing they have to the presence of Allah on this earth. And in order to make it more substantial than just the claims behind it, this collection of plagiarized Syriac poetry is ultimately seen as supernatural in nature because, according to Muslims, it's not just claimed to be divine, but it shows divine authority. You're going to find all over social media how it reveals scientific information that was only verified centuries later, like embryology, astronomy, oceanography, and even geology, that it prophesies accurately about future events, revolutionized the world through its insights in merging civil law and religion, and even created prosperous societies like Andalusia and the UAE. They would say it remains unmatched in its poetic beauty when compared to any piece of ancient or modern literature, and on it goes. I can quote Muslim sources on this in Mushkat al-Musabi, Volume 3, page 6664. As the Quran was revealed, no credit is given therefore to the Prophet, that's referring to Muhammad, but the fact remains that this book is second to none in the world, according to the unanimous decision by learned men in points of diction, style, rhetoric, thoughts, and soundness of laws and regulations to shape the destinies of mankind. So obviously they can't speak highly enough of this piece of literature. But when it ultimately comes down to it, you only need to read maybe for 5 minutes before you realize this isn't as miraculous as it's made out to be. And if you are able to get through it in its completion, you're not going to find any arguments or criteria the Quran puts forward for itself regarding any of these subjects apart from the following. This is Surah 3:11, 13 through 18. Or they say, he has forged it. So Muhammad is speaking or hearing revelations from Allah and has been hearing criticism saying this is just a forgery. So Allah says, say, So bring 10 forged portions of a revelation like it, and call on whom you can rather than Allah, if you are truthful. So if they cannot answer you, so know it is only sent down by Allah's knowledge, and that there is no God except Him. So are you Muslims? Whoever was desiring the world's life and its ordinance, we will fulfill their works within it, and they will not receive less in it. Those who will have anything in the hereafter except the fire, and what they have done in it will come to nothing, and vain is what they were doing. So this passage in Surah 11:13 says, well, bring 10 copies of something like it if you don't think it's from God, but you can't, so admit it's from Allah. Surah 10 makes the same point in verse 37, and this Quran was not forged without Allah, but it confirms what was written between his hands and is an exposition of the book. There is no doubt in it from the Lord of the worlds. Or do they say, he has forged it? Say, so bring a portion of a revelation like it, and call him you can rather than Allah, if you are truthful. So now it's gone from 10 to a section. Bring something comparable to this word of Allah, and otherwise, admit it's from Allah. And finally, Surah 2:23-24 says, if you are in doubt as to that which we have sent down on our servant, so bring a surah like it, a chapter. And call your witnesses rather than Allah if you are truthful. So if you do not do it, and you will never do it, so fear the fire whose fuel is the people and stones prepared for the infidels. So notice that the argument that the Quran actually makes for itself doesn't mention geography, doesn't mention embryology, doesn't mention geology, doesn't mention any of these things, not even its prophetic nature. It says, you can't write anything better. And if you bring me an example of something better, then we'll judge it and determine it's not as good as the Quran. Now, once again, that is the argument, full stop, regarding the Quran's miraculous nature. You can't do better. And the only exception to this as far as a case for the Quran's divine nature is Surah 11, Ayah 49, which actually is in the midst of a historical error where it claims that one of Noah's sons died in the flood and claimed they landed on Mount Judy rather than Mount Ararat, which is, again, two entirely different locations. The only argument that the Quran is going to present itself is that its critics can't produce something better than its poetry, and Act 17 Apologetics has taken to calling this the argument from literary excellence, which, to be as frank as possible, is the worst argument ever used to defend something in history. It's based on an opinion or an individual's reaction rather than the text. And note, if it's only based on this test, then one person saying they don't like the way the Quran sounds debunks the argument. But that's when the Muslim will say, well, it's only when judged by somebody who already believes that it's miraculous. And that would ultimately prove nothing, since you have to believe the conclusion in order to come to it. If you're into logic, the argument is basically set up like this. A isn't B, therefore A is C. The Quran isn't like anything else, therefore the Quran is the word of Allah. B and C are totally unrelated, so it doesn't prove anything.
Now, isn't it true, though, Sean, that they also say that in the Arabic, in the original language, so if we read it in English, we're not experiencing the actual miracle because it's been basically changed by the challenge of translation. So in English, it's not a miracle, but in Arabic, in classical Arabic, in the kind of Arabic that it was written in, which is not the same Arabic that people speak, and the Arabic that people speak is not the same from country to country, Arabic speaking countries. So is that also an argument that they also make clear that, hey, by the way, we're also saying that in the original, in this particular form of Arabic, this classical form of Arabic, that's where the miracle lies.
Oh, well, they could make that argument, but let's ask an Arabic scholar on this. This is 23 years, page 57. Ali Dashti reports, the Quran contains sentences which are incomplete and not fully intelligible without the aid of commentaries. Foreign words, unfamiliar Arabic words, and words used with other than the normal meaning are many. It is also filled with adjectives and verbs inflected without observance to the concords of gender and number, illogically and ungrammatical allied pronouns which sometimes have no referent and predicate, in which rhyme passages are often remote from the subject. These and other such aberrations in the language have given scope to the critics who deny the Quran's eloquence. So even according to people who are experts in this classical Arabic language would say that the Quran is a disaster, and if handed in any major university that was examining this, without the threat of having your head cut off for daring to question it, they'd laugh it out of the room. So the argument of this being so beautiful and so poetic, grammatically that's false. Substantially that's false. Logistically, that's false.
Because I was gonna say isn't one of the arguments from Christian theism as an argument for God's existence the existence of objective beauty? And so if you can find genuine objective beauty unmatched in the original language as poetry in the Quran, then wouldn't that be a legitimate argument for its miraculous nature? But what you're saying here is that, well, those who actually read that classical Arabic and understand the difference between poetry and gibberish are saying that, hey, there are words in here that don't make any sense.
It's not Arabic.
And is that because the Arabic language changed? I mean, is it possible that the long-lasting nature of the miracle is the flaw in the argument rather than it being a miracle altogether? Maybe they're just wrong about how it being an eternal miracle, meaning it's a miracle today as much as it was a miracle yesterday. Maybe it was only a miracle as far as its poetic beauty, as they say, unmatched.
Well, the counter argument would be, so how then do we benefit from it if the linguistic nature of it is unpreserved today?
Because that's one of the arguments they make, is that the Quran not only is not a temporary miracle like other miracles of the past, it is a long-lasting miracle, continuously proving Islam to be true.
Which, once again, is false, even according to the Quran itself. It doesn't say that this is so beautiful. It says you can't produce something better. It's a point of comparison rather than a point of actual objectivity in the text. So when this argument of competition, of quality, and comparing of taste is ultimately the issue, I don't argue the Bible's from God because it's beautiful. I can note that, and even secular groups have noted it's beautiful Hebrew poetry. But when it comes down to it, the argument for the Quran itself isn't even put in this regard or tier. So if I'm going to judge the Quran according to the Quran, it's no accident why Muslims have to commit this red herring and say, look over here, look at all this science. But this is where then the problem actually lies. If you encounter someone who argues, if you just knew the scientific and miraculous insights, you'd know that there has to be a divine mind beyond these things. Well, let's actually read the verses of these divine insights and show that they either A, aren't talking about scientific information at all, or getting information that was plagiarized from pagan sources, believe it or not.
So real quick, one of the arguments that the Quran is the miracle from God, the singular miracle of Islam, is its unmatched poetic beauty. You've dealt with that, but there's another argument that says, no, it also gives us revelatory insight into the world that no one could have known at that time.
According to Surah 1149, in the midst of a historical
So let's
era.
break those down.
Yeah, let's start with embryology. The argument is made in Surah 23, verses 12 through 14. And indeed, we created the human from an extract of mud. Then we made him a nufta in a secure place. Then we created the nufta into a clot. So we created the clot into a piece of flesh. So we created the piece of flesh into bones. So we clothed the bones with flesh. Then we made it another creature. So blessed be Allah, the best of creators. This claim is supposedly put forward as to note the development of early human life, the fetal development from a zygote into or a blastocyst into a fetus and then ultimately into a baby. The problem is this presentation that's given in Surah 23 is not only false, but it's plagiarized from Galen's De Semine, which was written in Pergamum, which is in modern-day Turkey today, in 150 A.D., which is about 500 years prior to the time of Muhammad. So he could have absolutely have heard this through hearsay. This is the account, translated, of course, from original Greek. But let us take account back again to the first conformation of the animal. And in order to make our account orderly and clear, let us divide the creation of the fetus overall into 4 periods of time. Notice the common factor there. The first is which is seen as both in abortions and in dissection, the form of the semen prevails. At this time, Hippocrates also, he's the father of medicine, the all-marvelous, does not yet call the conformation of the animal a fetus. As we heard just now in the case of semen voided in the 6th day, he still calls it semen. So he's noting reproductive fluid as a piece of biology all on its own. But when it has been filled with blood, notice the clot, the heart and brain and liver are still unarticulated and unshaped, yet have now a certain solidarity and considerable size. This is the second period. The substance of the fetus has the form of flesh and no longer the form of semen. Accordingly, you would find that Hippocrates too no longer calls such a form semen, but as he said, fetus. The third period follows on this when, as it was said, it is possible to see the three ruling parts clearly and a kind of outline, a silhouette, as it were, of all the other parts. You will see the conformation of the three ruling parts more clearly, the stomach more dimly, much more still that of the limbs. Later on they form twigs, as Hippocrates expressed it, so the introduction of bones, indicating by the term of their similarity to branches. The fourth and final period is the stage when all the parts and limbs have been differentiated, and at this part Hippocrates the marvelous no longer calls the form an embryo only, but already a child. 2, when he says that it jerks and moves as an animal now fully formed, the Arabic would be a new creation. That's where Muhammad, of course, plagiarized this. The time has come for nature to articulate the organs precisely and to bring all the parts to completion. Thus it caused the flesh to grow on and around all the bones. At the same time it made it the ends of the bones ligaments to bind them to each other, along with their entire length it placed around them on all sides thin membranes called peristyle, on which it caused flesh to grow. Now, that is scientifically false, but noting that Galen's observations are reasonable, given him referencing historians, scientists, literally the first physician, Hippocrates, in order to make this point. But given the one-to-one copying of information from a pagan source, Galen was not a Christian, he was not a Muslim. When he's making these references, this is supposedly revelation from Allah. Yet Muhammad is referencing it not only as something that was already common knowledge 500 years prior, but was falsifiable knowledge, because as we observe in embryology today, what do we know about fetal development? The bones, the organs, everything is fully intact within the first trimester. There isn't a stage in which there are no bones and suddenly they're introduced. There isn't a stage where there is no flesh and the flesh is introduced. We're noting that the semen stage is completely devoid of it. It's the woman's egg that is joined with a part of the man's semen. I don't know if those listening have had this talk yet. Feel free to ask your parents. But it's ultimately centered around something that was mistaken in the ancient world, but the best that they had to offer. Now, it is important to note that it is not wrong for an illiterate 7th century caravan robber to believe what he heard about modern science during his time. It is wrong to argue that the Quran is miraculous when he claimed this was revelation from Allah, because I would expect Allah to know what we know at least today about fetal development. Let's go on to astronomy. Surah 1883 says, they ask you about Zi al-Qarnayn. That's a nickname for Alexander the Great. It means the two-horned one. Say, I will recite to you an account of him. Surely we established him on the earth, and we gave him from everything away. So he followed away until he reached where the setting of the sun. He found it in a muddy spring, and he found a people by it. We said, O Za al-Qarnayn, either you torment or that you do good to them. Now, the problem with this is, I think, very straightforward. The sun does not set in a muddy spring on the earth that Alexander the Great or Al-Qarnayn was able to travel to. Surah 67:5 also makes a point about the stars as well. Indeed, we adorned the heaven of the world with lamps and made them to be missiles for the Satans, and we prepared for them the torment of the blaze. Describing shooting stars as actual stars is not only false, but also in what we know from astronomy, their purpose is following orbit based around their gravity and mass, not because they're chasing devils. And even if that were to be the case, that's not something that we could verify scientifically. This is referring to something in the realm of the unseen. And apparently these demonic creatures that are being chased by shooting stars, again, not stars, they're pieces of debris that light up in our atmosphere based on what metals they're composed of and gases. But it's all centered around this mistaken identity of the Satans being the object of these things. And of course, if that's in fact the case, that these demons being pursued by shooting stars are in fact their purpose, they seem to be following the Prometheus school of running away from things by never considering an alternative direction, continuously following a pattern of orbit, which of course Christians discovered the purpose why, but Muslims were as anyone else was in the ancient world, very superstitious about the nature of astronomy. And if you're going to argue this is miraculous insight, I would hope that you're talking to someone more polite, because that is something worth being laughed out of the room. The sun doesn't set on this planet in a muddy spring, and the stars aren't missiles that are meant to torture or pursue or ward off demons. Oceanography is another one that they would argue. They'd say in Surah 25:53, it is he who mixed the two seas. This is fresh Furat, and this is salty and bitter, and he has put a barrier between them and forced repealing. That is, of course, an argument saying that, oh, well, it's this insight into the miraculous nature of the Quran, that the two kinds of waters don't mix. You ever heard of brackish water?
Yeah.
Mixture of salt and fresh water that is, in fact, possible scientifically?
Yeah, it's actually cool because I was cave diving, and it was a mix of fresh and salt water, and you have to decide whether you're going to be in the fresh or the salt. Otherwise, if you're in the middle, you can't see very well because it's very blurry. But yes.
But they are mixing.
At where they meet, but not really. They don't. Yes and no.
Yeah, the brackish water is where these things can, in fact, meet. And note, this is the point. When he's observing this, the majority of the tafsir or the commentaries just note this as boundaries between nations and the different oceans. So if we're arguing, oh, this is an insight into the mix of salt water and fresh water, you could justify that from the text, but that's false. Or you can argue it from nations, but the idea that continents divide oceans isn't a scientific miracle. I'm sure that Muhammad could tell that there is a big block of land between that ocean, and that Allah's insight into that isn't miraculous. When we're talking about geology, Surah 78, verse 6 says, have we not made the earth flat, and the mountains like pegs? The tafsirs or commentaries on the Quran note this as noting that these are stakes or tent stakes, literally, that provide stability. And this isn't the only place that this is described. You can also see Surah 16:15, 21:31, and 31:10 emphasizing these details. But for the sake of time, I'll note the one that also mentions the flat earth. The earth is not flat. And mountains aren't a sign of stability externally. They are signs of instability internally from the earth. They couldn't have been more wrong if they wanted to. And on it goes. But these are the sort of things that if you aren't willing to actually look up these passages, they just post verses on the screen with some sort of chanting that's going to give you a headache after a while. It's all centered or dependent around your ignorance and willingness just to take these passages at face value. But a plain reading of them would show that these insights are actually errors or have to be read into the status of some sort of insight, which either Muhammad could have completely understood from his time as guesswork, or were plagiarized from sources that predate him, and of course were just as much in error as his guesses. So that's another issue. Now, this is where we then get into the third aspect, not just insights into science, but they'd say it's prophetically accurate. That's something that we as Christians would argue as a sign of reliability from the Bible. But did you know that the Quran isn't a prophetic book at all? It makes no predictions of the future in any way apart from there being a general day of judgment.
That would be a miracle in the Quran, and the miracle of Islam is the Quran itself. Muhammad didn't perform any miracles. There are no extra Quranic miracles. There are no miracles in the Quran as far as prophetic ones, other than the ones that are basically plagiarized from the Bible.
Or, in this case, pagan sources or Zoroastrian sources or whatever else you want to name. But they do claim that there is a prophecy, so we'll read it. Surah 30, 2-4 reads, the Rum, that's believed to be the Romans, are defeated in a near part of the land, and after having been defeated, they will be victorious within a few years. To Allah is the affair. Before and after on that day, the believers will rejoice. Now, what has literally just been said? The Rum have been defeated, but in a few years they will be victorious. Is that a prophecy?
No, it's just an educated guess, I guess you could say.
That's just a general observation. Someone lost today, but eventually I'm sure they'll win. Well, I'm going to become a prophet right now and say that, okay, the Arizona Wildcats are having a bad season, but I'm sure within my lifetime they'll at least win one basketball game. I'm a miraculous source of information, if that is true even once in any general sense.
Now bow the knee.
Yes. Allahu Akbar. That is not an accurate prophecy. That is a very general claim. And by the way, within a few years is a very broad statement as well, because according to Muslim historians, if the event that Muhammad is speaking of is the Persians taking Jerusalem from the Byzantine Empire in 614 AD, they didn't even organize a counteroffensive until around 8 years later, and they didn't see victory until about 14 years later. So a few constitutes past the point of most people's attention spans. I'm sure this would not fit that bill. Within a few years, most Muslim commentators note anywhere from 3 to 5 years. We have over a decade before we see any meaningful victory against the Persians on Roman borders. So here's the point. When these arguments are put forward and they say that, oh, look at these scientific accuracies, look up the passage and take them at face value, because you're going to find the Quran over and over and over again. These are the words plain in their meaning, easy to understand. If you can't have a meaningful understanding of things without an insight into a language no one speaks, or a nuance into some verbiage which would not be applied to any place of literature, anyone would be able to spot that and say you're hiding behind something, you're not letting the text speak for itself. Now, another important note is to not say that we're clear in this either. When a Muslim would say, well, you have the same problem then, because there's scientific inaccuracies in the Bible, aren't there? And absolutely. Let's read through a few of the examples that we get even from skeptics. In Isaiah 40:22, we're told, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the earth like the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. Well, here's the interesting thing about that. If the earth is literally a circle, as Isaiah is presented as saying, why isn't also a scientific error to describe the earth's inhabitants to grasshoppers? Because as we probably learned from Mr. Miyagi from Karate Kid, grasshopper is a general term to describe something smaller than you.
Yeah, didn't one of the Israelites, when seeing the Canaanites living in the Promised Land, we are like grasshoppers
in their sight. We were smaller than them. So why would a point of comparison be allowed to be treated as a simile, but not the previous sentence? Another example would be in the same book, Isaiah 11:2. He will set up a banner for the nations. He will assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Well, that's a clear scientific error, because you know the earth doesn't literally have four corners.
We're a cube. We're the Borg.
Yeah. Well, here's the problem. Why are these same critics not considering the Marine Corps' 3rd Division website also an error when they say in the last sentence of the Marine hymn page that this song has been sung from the four corners of the earth? It's almost as if that's referencing not the shape of the earth, but the directions of north, east, south, and west. It's not hard to give this a point of comparison. They would say that in Job 26:10, he drew a circular horizon on the face of the waters, and at a boundary of light and darkness. See, a circular horizon, not an ovaltine one. Job 37:18 says, with him have you spread out the skies, strong as a cast metal mirror. So they're saying that the atmosphere is solid, a metal object. Most would translate it as bronze. Well, let's take even the second half of this. If the earth has a literal bronze or metal mirror for an atmosphere, why is this insight found in the first book of the Old Testament, Genesis, as opposed to the first poetic book of the Old Testament in Job? It's almost as if the observation is being made with a like comparison, as opposed to something hard. I don't know how they'd observe something you determine through touch. But I do know how the author of Job could visually compare ancient or polished mirrors with the sky as something clear. You can take another angle at it, but it's not, as we see in the Quran, blatantly false or plagiarized statements that are contrary to what we know today. In Psalm 104 and verse 5, you, speaking of the Lord, who laid the foundations of the earth so that it should not be moved forever. See, the earth is stationary. It's never going to move, right? Well, if the psalmist is scientifically arguing the earth is stationary, why is it only appearing in poetic literature instead of historical? Does the genre matter in how something is interpreted or not? And note, this is the same grace that we would give to the Quran, but we didn't make the argument that this is why we believe the Bible is true,
Yeah.
because of scientific insights.
And is the psalmist really indicating planetary movement rather than that I don't
nature
have
of
to
it.
worry about the ground underneath me vanishing moment to moment, that it's a firm foundation that I can trust to be there, for the most part? Because that's what poetry is usually generalizations. We live in a scientifically black and white precise, Western mindset, and they didn't think in those terms. So we have to interpret, and I would grant this to the Islamist as well. I would grant the same thing. We have to think in those types of mindsets that these texts were written in.
Right, and if the
But we don't claim the Bible makes unknown scientific claims.
And
That's
if
the claim that
someone
the Quran does.
And if someone does, then they're worthy of the same mockery that we would give to these arguments. But the point being made is this: if you're arguing that these are errors, it's irrelevant on the real issue, because Christians shouldn't make that kind of argument about the Bible being true because of these insights. Those who do should be condemned for the same errors who make these kind of objections to it. It's a collection of historical, poetic, and prophetic literature. It's accurate in the information it presents, which are observations about the nature of God and the affairs of men, but modern science itself isn't based around these things. It's based around the concept that God created things in order. So men who were followers of the Christian God understood that as a premise and began to make note of those patterns. That's why it's no accident that every member, without exception, of the scientific revolution were Christians. Why? Not because the Bible is a science textbook, because it's a revelation of a God of purpose. And if the order that he inspired his followers to look for, noting those patterns and laws that he's written into his handiwork, it's using those principles that founded the concept of science to undermine what we read today. And that would be essentially like a child, because he's grown up, using that as evidence to argue against the existence of his parents. Islam doesn't have a hand in any of this, since the only thing that it inspired to the world was looting, robbery, and plagiarism of Jewish, pagan, and Christian discoveries and claims. It's no wonder why the Ben Kingsley 1001 discoveries of the Islamic world ultimately were just things robbed from the Greeks and the Turks anyway. But the point being made is this: if you want to present the Quran in a different angle, by all means. But it's no accident why the only way Islam is ever presented is a look over here or an attack on the Bible. The reason it doesn't make any of these claims is because it can't. And this is where we get down to the real heart of the issue. You too isn't an argument in favor of Islam. If we grant that Christianity has the same problems that Islam has, Islam doesn't stop suddenly having those problems. There's just two losers. And when you go through these passages, you just make more problems for Islam, since the Quran affirms the Old and New Testament as the words of Allah in Surah 3:3-4. So now the Quran is in error for affirming false scriptures. And going through them, you're either misrepresenting them or playing dumb regarding the genre as poetic literature, which is also wrong to misrepresent the words of Allah, since they're identified in 1827, as well as a dozen other places, as being treated with respect, that all the revelation that has come to us from your Lord. We can go on to note others, but let's take maybe a side note about those ideas of inspiring functional societies like Andalusia, according to the eloquent Barack Obama.
And I want to also see if you could address the argument that Shabir Ali always uses in all of his debates.
Yeah. Well, that would be
the mathematical, the math in the Quran. He says that there's this
the number
incredible mathematical ingenious to the Quran, and I have my counter, but I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I usually default to Nabil Qureshi's response in his book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, where he takes some time to address it and noting that there is a mathematical miracle in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, because if you note that this precise date and this number, the number of syllables, and these other issues, that it actually ends up predicting this specific massacre that occurred on this date at this time and in this place. And the reality of the absurd comparison is to say, okay, anyone can set up, or even in the case of Shabir Ali, fudge the numbers in a couple of places in order to say, well, every single number of verses in the Quranic chapters is divisible by 13. the total completion of the number of chapters in the Quran divisible by 13, every single reference, every single note, it's all following this specific pattern, and so you see this divine plan. Well, my response to that would once again be, okay, if that was applied or noted or noticed anywhere else with any other number, would that convince you that that word was then inspired or miraculous? The answer would obviously be no. You're reading back into the text a pattern that you determined in advance, not a number that you see or identify in the Quran as being the means by which you identify it. We already established that the Quran's only argument for its miraculous nature is you can't produce something better. So for Shabir Ali to make up this thing wholesale is the same kind of conspiracy theories that you saw being formulated by the Anglo-Israel or today the Black Hebrew Israelite groups that say that, well, if you just like note the number of syllables or this kind of pattern, then suddenly you're predicting the date of the rapture based off of whether or not Adam had a belly button or not. It's totally irrelevant information and not a standard by which the Quran presents itself as miraculous. So if Shabir Ali's going to stand on those kind of arguments, and he hasn't in a very long time, then of course he's going to have to die by the same sword he's been sharpening, because anyone could read those kinds of numbers or patterns into anything to prove whatever they want.
And the numerology, or I should say the mathematical miracle of it, is just that there is continuity and mathematical precision between words and syllables, and no predictions are made. He's not claiming there are predictions. And my wonder is that mathematics were known in the 7th century. I mean, look at the mathematical precision and genius of the Egyptian pyramids, and we don't call those Egyptian divine miracles. We just know that, hey, these builders knew something, and in fact, we're not even sure how they built them. We just know that the math is incredible.
Yeah, look at the precision and the foundations of algebra when it comes to the Chaldean inscriptions and so forth. They've been using these things for thousands of years.
Yeah.
These were smart cookies. But
so I don't know how that makes it a miracle. That's what I've always confused by that. My counter is like, rather than trying to argue against that, no, the math is wrong, because you have to ask the question, which Quran? We can actually say that now.
Yeah,
for a long time, people thought there was just one Quran, but now we know that there are dozens of variants, even in Arabic, not just in modern translations, but variants. And there is no one Quran. But that aside, let's just say, well, maybe there is just one Quran. The one that Shabir Ali reads has some kind of mathematical consistency that he sees as miraculous. And I think, well, every time I look at an ancient building that is mathematically correct, doesn't tell me that it's a miracle. It just means that they were good at math. Humans can do math. It's not something that only God can do. So I don't understand why it's a miracle. I could say, wow, it's pretty ingenious, but miraculous? I don't know about that.
Yeah, the nature of a miracle is that there is no other explanation, because it lines up not just with the actions of God. It's an intervention in nature, but it passes the line of coincidence or even providence because it lines up with the purposes of God. If you're going to argue, well, the formulation of these words in this particular order, I can do that with the Bible too.
Yeah.
People who've put together biblical
They have tried
stuff.
and have failed.
Yeah, it's silly, but the argument from anyone else sounds just as stupid. So.
And the person one of the people that actually introduced this idea, not the Barsili or whatever his name was, not himself, but his followers, Barsilianism, pointed out that the texts of the Bible and the Quran were divine in nature because of their mathematical precision. He made the same argument for the Bible, and then those arguments were sort of taken from, he's sort of the originator of that idea, that there was this mathematical ingenious to the Bible and the Quran, and these are all sort of borrowed from his followers, not he himself. But anyhow, as a magician, as an illusionist, I am challenged by the miraculous nature of those who have claimed to have paranormal abilities, claiming to see the future, claiming to, when I was dealing with the transcendental meditation guys, the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a guru from India, came to America and popularized transcendental meditation. And they would claim that they could get themselves in an altered state of consciousness, train their bodies to defy the laws of physics by levitating. And they would just practice daily, hopping up in the air from a lotus position, having their legs folded up on each other, and they would hop in the air. And then someone would take a photograph and put it in the newspaper, and they thought, see, this guy just levitated. And I remember having these debates with Westerners who were into this, regular weekly debates. And they said, I go, but you're still just hopping. He goes, well, yeah. And his argument was, but can you hop that high? I thought, well, if I sat every day developing those muscles, trying to hop from a lotus position, eventually I probably could, but I've never wasted the time to do so. My mentor, Andre Cole, would offer $25,000 for anyone who could levitate for $1,000 per second. For anyone who could levitate up to 25 seconds. People would come. We'd be on tour. People would come, and he would say, oh, it's one of those. We're going to go in the back, give them his space, their time, and see if they do it. And he had this money sitting in a holding account, and it was ready to go. And in 50 years of ministry, I don't know how many years he actually offered that reward, but he never had a single person even claim $1,000, not even one full second of levitation. And so in my view, it's not just divine intention that makes a miracle, but it's also the breaking of the laws of physics. It is knowing that which is unknowable by the traditional human five senses. You know, we call that ESP, extrasensory perception, to perceive unknowable things like future events, not future educational guesses. Like, well, I have a 50% chance in guessing who's going to be the next president once we've nailed it down to two candidates. Okay.
Or someone's at war with someone and they might win a battle at some time in the future.
Yeah. The Bible predicts things with a level of specificity and time gap where all the factors could not possibly have been guessed by any stretch of the imagination.
Isaiah 44-45 is a perfect example. Over 2 centuries before the birth of the Medo-Persian alliance, their greatest king, Cyrus the Great, has his military victory over Babylon predicted, not in vague general Nostradamus-y terms, but saying this kind of material is going to have this kind of treatment, this kind of weather pattern is going to accompany this kind of fortress, with this nation against this nation and this king by name, so that you will know who I am.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So the mathematical nature is not a miracle then, even if it were true, even if you were to say, okay, yeah, it's mathematically, there are so many chapters that are divisible by pi, this and that. That doesn't make it a miracle any different than I could say, hey, there are 66 books of the Bible, and they have this many thousands of verses, and if you divide that by this and that and get this, then it's amazing how these numbers all just pop up. That doesn't equate to a miracle. But if the Bible says 800 years before that names at least just 8 prophecies coming true about the person of Jesus. A mathematician said that the likelihood would be 1 in 10 to the 17th power, just for 8 of the over 300 predictions about the one who would come, the cloud rider, the one who'd be the Messiah, the coming of the actual Creator into the human sphere and talk as a man. Even just 8 of those predictions coming true would be the similarity of burying the state of Texas with 2 feet of silver dollars and putting an X on one of them, sending and mixing it up with tractors, the entire state of Texas, and sending out one person blindfolded saying, okay, take your time, and when you're ready, pick one up, and picking up the one with an X. That would be sort of the probability, the likelihood of one person accidentally meeting just 8 of those criteria, those predictions.
Which, of course, is to demonstrate it's not a matter of dumb luck. It's fixed. Right. And the God that is sovereign is able to fix things in a way where he knows not only what will happen, but is able to establish through his power and influence how these things ought to happen in order to show his nature and authority. Yeah. But the argument for the Quran still remains, so let's finish with these.
And I want to remind people of that. Islam claims no miracles except the Quran. The Quran is the miracle of Islam. Christians say that the resurrection is the ultimate miracle of Christian faith, of the miracles of Jesus. Obviously, there are plenty of other miracles in the Christian faith or in the Jewish faith that promote or suggest the truthfulness of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the ultimate miracle of Christianity is a human being coming back from the dead.
And so we have our miracles to compare. But let's ask about the influence. Show me the fruit. Well, since Christians don't have to argue that, the Bible's the Word of God because it's inspired productive societies. We could argue that with Western civilization, but you could also emphasize the flaws. We're not making this argument, but Islam has. So let's ask the question. when we're told about Andalusia, which was the ancient Arab-occupied region known today and before that time as Spain, the majority that we're told about, or should I say gaslit about, regarding Muslim Europe comes from one source, and her name's Karen Armstrong. She was an ex-nun who was now an atheist and has a degree in literature, not history. And yet with this literary degree, much like Riza Aslan, seems to wax eloquent on things she doesn't actually know anything about. And since she has no formal education in Islamic history, she serves the liberal approach that she subscribes to by just writing down whatever fits the narrative, and having a doctorate in front of her name allows people to share it on social media. That gained her enough traction to even be quoted by Barack Obama in his observations in Cairo of Andalusia being proof that Islam is a religion of peace and scientific progress. But if you want an actual source from a woman who came from an Islamic background, whose writings that predate Karen's birth by decades, read no further than Bat-Yeor, which means daughter of the Nile. O ye who believe, this is quoting and noted from the book The Dhimmi, Jews and Christians Under Islam. O ye who believe, the non-Muslims are nothing but dirt. Allah has created them to be the partisans of Satan, most treacherous in regard to all that they do, whose whole endeavor is neither life is useless. They themselves imagine that they are doing fine work, upon which rests the curse of Allah, of angels, and of men collectively. If you prefer Muslim historians who actually lived in Andalusia, consider the writings of Ibn Hayyan of Cordoba's rights, or should I say praises, of Abd al-Rahman in the 11th century, where he was praised for introducing the concept of a religious inquisition to Europe a century before the Catholics tried the same thing. You can read in the book, The Myth of the Andalusian Paradise, there is a whole book on this, pages 126 and following, details of him using public entertainment sessions of his citizens being torturing and executing infidels, mutilating slaves who refused his advances, and even paying his executioner by purposely gifting him pearl necklaces on the bodies of the women he'd be beheading. He used dark-skinned children as counterweights for his wells, and according to Muslim historians, he was considered the greatest of the Muslim rulers of Andalusia, and recommended his name for caliph, or the successor of Muhammad. And this isn't even mentioning the accounts they censored of Berber rulers who regularly participated in cannibalism. And if we're going to go to the UAE, oh, they're prosperous? Yeah, violation of almost all of the UN Charter of Human Rights, especially Article 14. Conversion from Christianity is a capital offense there. You tell me which is more influential. I'd say that's wrong.
Well, thanks so much, Sean, for doing the research, taking the time. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with our regular question and answer time. God bless you.
You've been listening to A Reason for Hope. Thank you again for joining us as we continue our journey through God's Word, one question of the heart at a time. Until we meet again, we would love to connect with you. You can text or email your questions to questionsforhope@gmail.com. You can also find out more about our ministry at calvarychristianfellowship.com. And be sure to join us next time on A Reason for Hope. A Reason for Hope is an outreach ministry of Calvary Christian Fellowship in Tucson, Arizona.